Okay, welcome everybody back to In Progress. This is our weekend roundtable discussion of the political stories, issues, and ideas that are top of mind for progressive folks across the Lone Star State this week. I'm Chris Mosier. I'm the communications director here at Progress Texas. We're a statewide nonprofit rapid response media organization promoting progressive messages and actions. We are recording this on Friday, January the 30th at 1:38 p.m. As we all know, the news cycle moves faster and faster every day, so things may have changed by the time you're actually listening to this. Welcome, especially if you're hearing us on Sunday morning on KPFT Radio in Houston. This week, joined by Advocacy and Development Coordinator Tatum Owens. Hi, Tatum.
Back again. Howdy, y'all.
Indeed. And we're very proud to welcome as our guest, first time with us here at Progress Texas, here at the round table, Dan Barrios, who is a member of the Richardson, Texas City Council, native of Brownsville, MBA from UNT, community leader beloved across North Texas. Dan Barrios, thanks for joining us, man. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Dan is also on the ballot for Congressional District 32, which is a heavily gerrymandered district that stretches way out into East Texas from the northeastern part of DFW where he lives. Running for this district is a tall order for any Democrat, of course. So, Dan, we commend you for stepping up. Give us a couple of minutes real quick on your experience there in Richardson local politics over the last few years and how that kind of morphed into an idea to give a congressional run a go.
Absolutely. Well, I can honestly say running for Congress or even running for city council was never in my 10, 20, or 5-year plan by any means whatsoever. Years ago, I was serving on the local PTA as a father. My son is now a senior in high school. And a couple of moms said, have you ever thought about running for city council? I was like, what exactly do they do? I wasn't sure. Like most Americans, I voted, but I had an idea what they did. So I looked into it. I said, Richardson has a population over 100,000. We're about 122,000 now. And I looked at the city council and I said, this doesn't represent who our city is. We're a very diverse city in ages, in backgrounds, in education, in culture, and I thought I had something and a voice we could bring to the council. So I made a run for it. Lost by 82 votes for the first run. Came back 4 years later, won by a landslide, and came back unopposed this past year. So I've had the great honor of serving the last 2 terms on the Richardson City Council. When the gerrymandering started, the talk started to happen. I was at an event and Congresswoman Julie Johnson kind of said, if I end up moving or if this whole, have you ever thought about running for Congress if I were to not run for that seat again? I said, well, no, it never was even close to being on my mind. I started to look at it and then we watched it as it went through the courts. And about half an hour after she announced, once the Supreme Court upheld these districts, my phone started ringing and people started saying, you're the best position. And I was like, I don't know. I was still hesitant about it. But one thing that I've learned is in Richardson City Council is that good solutions are about people and good government's about coming up with solutions. And Richardson is a fairly purple city. It's becoming more and more blue, but it is a fairly purple city. And I think this district, it's fair to say, reflects what Richardson is. So we're coming to people talking about solutions. We're coming to people and listening right now all over the district. It is a gerrymandered district, covers 8 counties. It touches 8 counties from southern Carrollton on the northwest corner of Dallas County all the way east to Upshur and Camp County, which is 1 county west of the Louisiana line. But there is a path. I am not in this to just increase my name recognition. I am not in this for any other reason other than to bring a voice to the people. And we see a path forward. Looking forward to it. We've been going full steam, visiting all the counties, and it's been an incredible experience.
Right on. Very cool. So for folks who may not quite understand what we're talking about here, CD 32 is the seat currently occupied by Congresswoman Julie Johnson in the U.S. House of Representatives. She has basically been drawn out of that district. She is now running in another district. And so kind of a wide open seat for Democrats, although very much a stacked deck against them in the way that the district is drawn. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we continue today. So as we're recording this on Friday, we are moving into a weekend very much marked by protest across the entire country. Recent events in Minnesota, which of course have reverberated here into Texas, have led first to today's National Shutdown Day, in which thousands of businesses and schools have observed across the country by shutting down, or folks just not showing up for what they were supposed to do today, which for a lot of folks is a good excuse to play hooky, but hopefully their minds are in the right place about this. Tatum, give us your impressions of what you've seen over the course of the day today with this national shutdown.
Yeah, so organizers across the country have put together this national shutdown taking place today, January 30th, as we're recording. I will share that I think I and a large part of my network, so politically involved Texans, came across this in the last several days, and so many businesses in the Austin area where I'm joining from have either closed or are opening up their space to any people who want to just be in community with each other today, as so many people have taken off work, are choosing to hold their money close to themselves instead of participating in the economy today. And even students are taking time off of school. Yeah, hooky for sure is a possibility, but I think a lot of people are actually deciding to join in and say, I refuse to be complicit in the actions that my government is putting on my neighbors. And so overall, we're going to see a lot of protests this weekend that follow this national day of shutdown. But I'd love if we could sit here and investigate a little bit what it means to be part of this shutdown today. So I work in a nonprofit. I think a lot of other people listening today might be the case for them as well. And it is a really hard time to be a worker, to work in the nonprofit industry. Things are bad. It feels like a bad time overall. And so some things that I am doing to try to participate today are I went and I made my purchases for the weekend yesterday. Instead of today, I am withholding my money. There's so many other things that you can do. You can donate your time, you can donate your resources, and join in on the not necessarily fun, but in on the effort.
One, it was kind of last minute, and I don't know if a lot of people, if it had time for word to get out about it. Now, coming from local government, I'm going to give a slightly different perspective. One, I think it's a beautiful thing whenever people gather to protest in whatever way they so choose. People need to have a voice. People need to have an ability to speak and speak up, whether it's economically or in any other way they choose. I'm not always convinced that the shutdowns necessarily work for reasons other than to make you feel good at the time. And if that's the sole purpose, great. I say that because coming from local government, next Monday on the city council, we're actually going to be talking about our revenue, which is what everybody calls their taxes, right? 8.24% here in North Texas. We've been shut down all week because of the ice storm we had. But of that percentage, one of it goes back to the city. That's how the city is run. And 1% goes to DART, which is our rapid area transit here in North Texas. Most of that goes to the state. You just mentioned that you bought stuff ahead of time, so the money is still in the economy. It's just not happening today. And ultimately, I think a lot of times when these happen, what it does is affect small businesses more than it does the big guys. And it's the big guys that we need to send a message to, but they're not affected by a day of sales decrease. It's the small businesses that tend to be affected more. Now, with that said, as a small business owner, if somebody wants to shut down, they absolutely should. And if somebody feels better and feels it's an outlet of protest, by all means, do it. Now, the bigger the actual effect it'll have in a larger economy, I'm maybe not as optimistic on the effect of that as maybe others may be.
Yeah, my daughter works for a restaurant in South Austin, and she is actually she's working this evening. They're open, but I think I'm not sure if they've shut their kitchen down or what, but it's kind of like Tatum mentioned, a lot of hospitality businesses are just throwing their doors open and let people come be in community if they like. And, my position is I'm going to go in there and buy a beer and give my daughter a great big fat tip this evening.
There you go.
So I am going to spend a little bit of money. And I agree, the idea of sending a message to our corporate overlords as it were. I mean, that's a good notion. That's a good plan. In this particular instance of what has gone down this Friday, not enough time really to really have it be universal and really widely done to send any kind of a real serious economic message. I do like the videos that we're seeing of kids demonstrating outside their classrooms and outside their schools. We're getting some video of that from out of Fort Worth, actually, Dan, from up from where you are. from one of our board members today. And so, as long as everybody's being cool and as long as nobody's causing any real trouble, I'm all about a little bit of time off of work or off of school to go and take part in one of the many, many protests that are happening, demonstrations and rallies that are happening all around Texas and all across the country. So if that time off and that time playing hooky is spent well in that way, outside of the economic impact idea, I think it's a good thing, and I think it's very much timely.
I'm gonna push against the word hooky in this situation because I think that definitely the efficacy of the actual national shutdown pointing to the lack of preparedness and universality that goes with it. I think that there could be a lot of preparation that could be put to use there. At the same time, I think it's a great learning opportunity for a lot of people to get politically involved. And it's one of several different instances where this has been people having to consciously decide how to help their communities where maybe they wouldn't have before. A lot of people are so invested in just their money and their daily personal life, which they may not understand is directly tied to the politics that we talk about here at Progress Texas on the daily. But this is a conscious effort to wake people up to that. And so I think it's okay that it's maybe a priming opportunity for a lot of people to get politically involved. And there's so many events this weekend going on just for that, whether it's a protest or community actions to support immigrants under attack.
Right. And of course, all of this has been spurred by the news over the last several weeks now, especially centered around Minneapolis. But we've seen this aggressive ICE and immigration policy thing go on for really over most of the duration of the first year of the Trump administration, Trump 2.0. Let's kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about what went down this Wednesday. And I was a little bit surprised how slow this story got out. I don't know if you guys noticed. It wasn't until pretty late on Thursday that I was hearing about what had amounted to a DPS crackdown on a bunch of mostly rural and San Antonio area protesters who showed up at the ICE detention facility at Dilley, Texas, just south of San Antonio on Wednesday. This coincided with a well-publicized visit to that facility to check on the young 5-year-old young man from Minneapolis who's been confined there and has caused so much nationwide stir. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Congresswoman Joaquin Castro showed up to have a look for themselves. What they saw was somewhat disturbing, but to me, even more disturbing, at least from the perspective of what we're talking about moving into this weekend or coming through this weekend, where there will be so many people showing up in person to demonstrate, is the fact that DPS appears to have gotten really rough on these protesters. From what we're understanding from the San Antonio Current, there were about 300 of them total. About 2/3 of them had actually left. They had actually, gotten in their cars or their buses or whatever, and they had split. By the time the DPS rolled up on the scene, only about 70 were left. It was still a relatively peaceful situation, to my knowledge, from what I understand. But suddenly there was tear gas involved. There were pepper balls that were fired into the crowd. Several members of the media were reported basically being gassed by DPS in this. There were elderly folks gasping for air. As far as I can tell, there was no serious hardcore. There was no attempt to bum rush the facility or anything like that, and no major conflict coming from the protesters towards these DPS troopers. And so, interested to hear. Let's go to Dan next. I don't know if you've been keeping up with this, but again, I was a little surprised how slow this news was to percolate out into the stream there.
Yeah, I did get to catch a little bit of that, and it did come out slow, and it didn't come out as, I think, widely covered by mainstream media here in Texas. And I was surprised by that, because I was kind of surprised, but not, and part of me wasn't. And that's just because, as you mentioned earlier, news moves at such a rapid rate, and there's so much going on. You don't know which fire to stare at, right? Because there's so many things in all directions. I think that's part of their strategy sometimes. Obviously, there was talks around not allowing congressional representatives in to do their oversight checks. They have a constitutional responsibility as part of the checks and balance systems. And one, I think that the fact that there's even talks about not allowing Congress men and women in to do their constitutional duty
Congress is supposed to be the boss. This is a federal
Yeah,
facility. That's oversight. Congressional oversight is intrinsic to this kind of thing.
absolutely. And seeing the way it's handled, I remember 20 some years ago, I graduated high school in the late 90s. So when the war started after the September 11th attacks, that was what I call my war, where I lost friends. I mean, friends I went to high school with, friends I served in ROTC
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
And I remember going down to Crawford Ranch, President Bush's ranch down Crawford, and protesting and camping out there for a couple of days in my early 20s. And that was in front of the president's house. And now we have people just peacefully protesting. And we're seeing things that in ways that we haven't seen in decades in our country. And that's very concerning to me. And it should be concerning to everybody. I feel like we've lost our humanity at times. And that is the bigger concern of mine.
I'll point to some of the news that came out this week was in the form of video footage. Really, I think it was from Dilley, right? That makes sense. Of a coordinated effort of people contained in the facility in color coordinated clothing, just shouting out for help. So why would you not show up to help? To peacefully protest and demand a change to so many people being put through suffering for what appears to be in a unlawful manner, inhumane manner, and just really terrifying way. This is just something that you have to respond to. If you don't respond to that, what is the point?
Tato, this week and last week, we've heard of inhumane people being treated inhumane, overcrowding, lack of bathrooms, lack of showers, where people are going days without showers. Congressman Castro was visiting Leon Ramos, and there's a story about him being sick, and some people are concerned about Leon being sick. These are major concerns, and I think it also lends itself to a bigger conversation around for-profit detention centers.
Yes.
As long as we're making money off of it, the problem will never end. And that's a whole nother day. I could talk about that for an hour or two on its own, but
yeah,
they're interrelated.
We could absolutely go on about that. And, speaking of, we're talking about, any kind of interruptions in the economy that we might try to mount, as consumers, now that our prison system is an intrinsic part of our economy, things have really gotten to a rather Orwellian sort of state around here. I'm curious about, we're definitely seeing a moment of at least momentary pausing and backtracking by the Trump administration and by DHS in terms of what's happening in Minneapolis. Clearly, tied to the massive amount of backlash across the country and around the world that's happened after the second shooting death at the hands of ICE just a few days ago, Alex Preddy. That tells me that they recognize that their strong arm tactics are causing ripples that they don't want to have to deal with. They're causing unrest that's inconvenient for them to have to deal with, which makes this crackdown in Dilley make very little sense to me. There's not any reason to tear gas a bunch of people when, all you're getting out of that is just bad PR.
I think that's the point, right? Like that there is no rhyme or reason. It's only violence. It's that's all that you can see from Minneapolis, the top of the U.S., to Texas. You see this continuity of violence put forth against people living here.
But it's my point is they are ruthless, and they are definitely not in line with us in terms of our political values or our moral values even. But the folks running the show are not stupid. They've got to see that this overreach, this power overreach, is causing resistance to their agenda. Which brings me to the whole Don Lemon thing. Don Lemon, former CNN journalist, now operating as an independent journalist, which reminds me of Progress Texas to a certain degree, Tatum, for sure, has been arrested on charges along with a couple of other lesser known independent journalists that he had somehow criminally interfered with a worship service that was going on in St. Paul there, of course, right next door to Minneapolis, Twin Cities there. I'm trying to picture Donald Trump sitting in the Oval Office or sitting wherever he sits and zeroing in on Don Lemon because he's a celebrity. When I think of Donald Trump's brain, I think of him thinking about celebrities as like this upper echelon of of influence and somehow that picking on Don Lemon is going to somehow get a message across to America that he's tough and that he's powerful and that he's right, which to me is just so disjointed and unhinged. But then again, that fits right in with the whole Trump thing. By the time this runs in Houston, the Don Lemon thing will probably have developed some, but impressions, Tatum, you go first on, picking on a guy who literally is no longer even with CNN. He's just doing his own thing.
I think that bringing Don Lemon to the majority of Americans who are showing up to protest and hold accountability to the mass censorship and attacks that you're seeing across America, it is a bad time to be somebody who shows up and holds your phone to the violence you're seeing on your screen and in front of you. The Supreme Court has decided last year that if you just are part of a protest, that you could be held accountable for actions of others. But bringing it to Don Lemon, yes, absolutely. Donald Trump is this Don and Don, the other Don, the one that is causing us so much problems, is obsessed with fame. And so I can definitely see that through line that you're talking about. At the same time, I think that like the people on the scene, that like the officers that arrested him, I'm sure that they wanted to make a big story out of it at the same time, like somebody, this big name is showing up, crack down on that immediately. Otherwise we're going to look bad, which is what we've seen again and again, because just don't do bad things, don't cause harm against other people, and then you won't be held accountable for it, except they're not.
Donald Trump, our president, we think of it as, okay, bad PR, but not everybody thinks of it as bad PR. There's a segment of our country that they see that as a rallying cry. They see the violence as a way to puff up their chest, whether it's because they feel more manly or because they feel more empowered or because they feel that they're doing God's work. For whatever reason, they feel empowered by that. So you're always going to have that segment of society. And I think that's been the base of what his understanding got him to where he is today. Now, he understands ratings. Obviously, as a reality TV star, he understands ratings, and he knows that his ratings are dipping. But I think that, although I've never met our president, he strikes me as somebody who is pretty sure when he sets his mind, he's pretty sure he's right, regardless of what's being thrown his way. I think those of us here could probably agree on that. So when he sees that a segment of his population, of his fan base, is starting to, his ratings are dropping with them, he may not be convinced in his mind. He may not accept the fact that there is a split. I speak to Republicans every day who are saying, look, I'm tired of the MAGA. I'm looking for somebody who's a sensible candidate because they've been lifelong Republicans and they're tired of that. And I think that some of that's starting to seep into his brain.
The fame fixation, strangely, it's really just occurred to me while we're talking about this, but the incident where he tear gassed a crowd of protesters outside of the White House so that he could cross the street and hold up a Bible upside down, I think, in fact, for a photo op in front of a church across the street from the White House there. This weird concept of religion, concept of the freedom of religion, that to me, I think if this thing with Don Lemon had happened anywhere else, if it had been at a coffee shop or if it had been just in an auditorium somewhere, the fact that it happened at a church, I think, has been grabbed upon by the Trump folks as this is our opportunity to fire up our religious base and have them, help them to characterize this attack on these journalists as somehow the defense of freedom of religion. Dan, I'm with you there that there's plenty of people who are very much still drinking this Kool-Aid, but I do have to think that after all we've seen over the last week or so, that there are a few people out there who used to be in that camp and are maybe thinking about skipping that camp who are now understanding the ways in which they've been emotionally manipulated by this president and his administration. I really hope that there are people who are seeing the light in that way.
Yeah. And I'm going to emphasize the latter part of that sentence. It's the president and his administration. That's why you're seeing calls to remove Kristi Noem. That's why you're seeing calls to Congress members to not fund ICE. Yeah. And, it's as many different outlets to cut the heads of the Hydra as you can.
So Dan, once again, is a member of the Richardson City Council up in DFW. And of course, a big story, which is a little bit west of you, has been the SD9 runoff.
Yes.
The special election to fill that state Senate seat vacated by Kelly Hancock, who is now the acting state comptroller. We've talked about this race. As we're recording right now, Election Day is tomorrow on Saturday, the 31st of January. So if you're listening to the podcast on Friday night or early on Saturday, please go vote. Please go vote. And if you're listening in Houston, this will be yesterday's news by now on Sunday. But Dan, I'm curious. We have talked to a few folks on the In Progress Weekly Talk from up around the Dallas area, and really interesting insights about what that race has meant to people on the ground there in DFW. Can you give us some insights on what you've observed?
I think there's a lot of confusion. Most of the conversations I've had, obviously that's on the other side of the Metroplex, and that's none of my areas is covered by this SD race. But the bigger conversation is kind of the timing of it and the confusion it causes a runoff around, as we're getting ready for February 17th, the start of the primary vote.
Right.
And I think that's the part of the confusion. That's the frustrating part, is the amount of confusion not everybody quite understands. I was just talking to somebody yesterday who has never voted in a primary, and they were very confused with why there was voting now, and then in 3 weeks there's voting again. In November there was voting again, and it's just the confusion. And again, probably part of somebody's plan as well.
What's even more about that is both in the case of SD9 and also the case of CD18 over in Houston, both of the candidates in the special election runoff will be on the ballot again. I'm pretty sure, Tatum, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're all on the ballot again in March for the primary. There's certainly several of them, depending on how the primary goes, will be on the ballot coming up in November. So we're voting.
It's a lot.
For a lot of the same people. It's kind of I can see, Dan, where someone who's just, maybe a presidential cycle, voter who doesn't vote very often, I can see where there would be some confusion. And of course, confusion tends to breed frustration and is going to turn people off. And that's a bummer too, probably by design as well. Tatum, do you have any thoughts for the SD9 voters around Tarrant County who, at this point are, hopefully excited to go and vote in this thing?
I think, take the opportunity to do your civic duty, because so many people don't want you to. And what an interesting race at that. You have national profiles here with Lee Wamsgans and Patriot Mobile, so much money backing this person. Yes. And then you have Taylor Ramett, a union-backed candidate, union member himself, and union leader himself at that. As someone whose brain is diseased with being interested in politics, I like it for that reason alone. It's an interesting story. And maybe that's what gets some people into it, telling fun stories here on Progress Texas about each of the candidates, right? But as Dan said, there's other deadlines on the way, with that primary coming up on March 3rd and early voting ahead of that. So just good luck and go vote, Texas.
There is one more note we wanted to get to here, and this is really interesting about Ken Paxton, who, of course, has announced his departure from our Attorney General's office. He is now running for Senate against Senator John Cornyn and Wesley Hunt over on the Republican side. Of course, Jasmine Crockett and James Tallarico at this point on the Democratic side. Paxton has taken kind of one right on the nose, Tatum, and you've been following this. Talk about what's going on with Jolt.
Yeah, I and reporters at Vote Beat Texas, so that's Eleanor Klivanoff, one of the best voting rights reporters here in Texas, just delivered the news this week that Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, quote, failed to offer any plausible proof that Jolt Initiative, who, if you're unaware, is a nonprofit that aims to increase civic participation among Latinos, any plausible proof that they're violating the law. A federal judge ruled Thursday. So that's from Eleanor Klivanoff over at Vote Beat Texas. And everybody already knew this, because that's the thing about Ken Paxton. He's a bulldog. He is a formidable force here in Texas as our attorney general, and good luck to anybody that he targets, because he will go with no proof in his hands and target transgender Texans here in this state, anybody that is seeking reproductive access, just his main culture wars that he wants to impart. And you'll see that there are lawsuits he's put forward to engage those battles. So in regard to Jolt Initiative, it is a good thing that this nonprofit is not being attacked for providing their mission-driven resources, especially in this environment, targeting so many Latinos here in Texas. But on top of that basic good thing about this case, I think it's nice to see Crooked Ken, as John Cornyn would call him, lose out this once. He's put forward other cases regarding plausible alleged voter fraud, and they've been baseless like this as well. So it's good to see him lose out, but better that Jolt and other nonprofits that could have been targeted if this decision was not decided in their favor will be protected in the long term.
One thing that I'd like for the listeners to have clear is that, the Jolt is a nonprofit organization that is trying to activate people into the political space, trying to activate young Latino voters.
Yeah.
A great number, including Progress Texas and including KPFT Radio, a lot of the voices and entities that you see out there in independent media these days that are daring to say these things, that are daring to defy the encroaching authoritarianism of the Trump regime and what's happened at the state level and government here in Texas as well. The vast majority of those entities are themselves nonprofits. And so when you hear about nonprofits being attacked, it's partly, it's not so much because they're nonprofits, it's because nonprofits tend to be the sources of these defiant voices. And so just be thinking about that in terms of, don't write that off. Don't just, some nonprofit, whatever, like it's just like, there's a difference between a nonprofit and a charity, and we could go down that, rabbit hole if we wanted to. But at this point, I think we should all be very, very wary about anyone, whether it's Don Lemon, whether it's Jolt, anyone being silenced by the government. We need to be thinking about very carefully about that. That's a scary, scary moment for us to be in.
And I think at the core of it, just go by the moral code of I'm going to protect my neighbor. The law is ever changing. I'm glad that it favored a great group trying to boost civic engagement and do right by our neighbors like Jolt. But Ken Paxton is going to wield the law however he can to get what he wants, I would guess. And one of the things that he was trying to target in this case is to revoke their nonprofit status, which you could see wielded against so many other nonprofits to be used as a part of a culture war.
Absolutely agreed, Tatum. So, Dan, as we start to wind down, let's get back to your run for Congress. Again, the new CD 32. It extends way, way out into East Texas. And of course, for folks who don't fully understand gerrymandering, let's maybe talk about that a second. This district is drawn to dilute the voting power of the rapidly bluing sections of suburban DFW by looping them into much redder sections out in the rural parts of East Texas. Talk to us about how you plan to, or do you plan to try and engage outside of your home area there in Richardson and kind of in the urban area around DFW. It's such a huge area. Geographically, it's a challenge. Talk about that.
So, yeah, it is a huge area. It touches 8 counties from northwest Dallas County all the way east to Camp and Upshur County, which is only one county west of the Louisiana line. It goes up for a tiny bit into Collin County. Now, we have been engaging voters all across the 8 counties, and we've driven through all of them. We've had events, not quite at all 8 counties yet, but we're pretty close. And people are excited. There's a lot of excitement, and not just from the Democrats, because it's a large, kind of long, skinny district. It goes east to west. It encompasses not only northern Dallas, where you have urban and suburban voters, because it encompasses Dallas and the northern suburbs. But then you have very rural areas. There are parts of East Texas just got indoor plumbing in the last few years.
Wow.
And obviously the needs are very different. And so people say, well, how are you going to talk about the needs? It's like, well, we're going to talk by talking to people. And while this was, obviously it was a district that Trump had his eye on because he needed 5 more districts out of Texas, 5 more red districts, 32, while Trump won it, when you look at the data, President Biden got 45% of the vote in this district overlap. Colin Allred, when he ran for Senate the first time, he got 44% of the vote. So there is a path.
You're talking numbers for Allred and for Biden by the way it's currently drawn. By the way,
it's currently drawn.
The new
precinct over precinct.
Okay,
Absolutely.
gotcha.
I think Beto got, I think it was up 42.4, 42.5. So he got a little less, but still all great performing numbers when you consider how much of this is rural Texas.
Yeah.
So there is a pathway. And I think the reality is every day I'm meeting Republicans who are excited. And I hear this every day. They say, Dan, you're the first Democrat I will ever vote for. There were people, I had almost 200 people at our kickoff event a few weeks back. And I had, I think, 7 or 8 Republicans in the room at my kickoff that had never been to a Democratic event and they told, I've never voted for a Democrat before. You'll be the first one.
Wow.
I was at lunch last week. I was at lunch in Richardson. I met a lady from Pittsburgh, Texas. Pittsburgh, to give you an idea as far as driving, it's about 2.5 hours east. Pittsburgh is probably the most eastern city in the district.
Mm-hmm.
About 2.5 hours different. And she recognized me and she said, I'm a lifelong Republican. You're the first Democrat I'm going to vote for. On top of that, I would like to throw a house party, invite all my Republicans friends because they're tired of MAGA. So when I hear this stuff, there's a lot of excitement.
That's great to hear. Would you talk a little bit more that creature is curious to us, that former Republican, perhaps even former, likely Trump voter, who just kept enough of their good common sense to be able to see what's happening around them and to be able to make a personal moral and ethical judgment that they no longer want to have anything to do with what's happening. Talk about those people, the people you're talking about, people who will be, pulling the lever for a D for the very first time in their lives, perhaps. What issues and what's important to those people? How are you finding those people easy to reach?
I really think it's just being humane and the humanity of what some of the stuff is happening. I mean, obviously, we're not talking about, reproductive rights. We're not talking about the ability, trans rights. We're not talking about some of those issues that obviously we're going to differ very much, but we're focused on what we agree on. We're focusing on what are the things we agree on, that you treat people humanely.
Right.
We don't just shoot people in the streets.
Right.
These are things that we could all agree on. We all agree that prices are getting higher. We all agree that the middle class is disappearing. And for those who are trying to enter into the middle class, it's getting harder and harder. That price to enter into the middle class is getting harder. Upward mobility is not as accessible as it used to be. These are things we all agree on. The instability, tariffs on, tariffs off, just depending on what kind of mood our president is in that day, that's not good for small business. Right. Because businesses need to be able to predict their costs. They need stability to succeed. And with what's happening in our federal government right now, there's no stability.
Right.
So right. I don't. To them, it's not a D or R issue. It's what's common sense. And I think people are getting to that point where we need to. And that's one thing I'm grateful for the experience on local city council is I know where everybody in a city council votes on D or R. There's no secret I'm a Democrat. There's no secret I've been a delegate to the state convention multiple times. At the same time, I've never seen a vote go down D or R on our city council. Not once in 3 years have I seen a vote at the local level go down a D or R in Richardson, Texas. That's because we're focused on solutions. And I think when we focus on solutions, we will find more things we have in common and save what's left of our democracy and keep those checks and balances and keep the separation of powers, which I think is foundational to our country and we need to maintain if we want to keep our country together. We can disagree about the stuff further down the road when we get to those, and we'll have those discussions, which isn't a bad thing to have those discussions. But let's focus on protecting our democracy. I think people are agreed on that.
We are definitely at one of those tipping points, sort of pivotal moments, crossroads moments for sure, where, we will be dealing with the repercussions of the chaos that's been visited upon us for years. I mean, if we were able to stop all of this in its tracks today, we will still have massive years worth of cleanup to do in terms of our global standing, in terms of our economic stability, in terms of the mess that's been made with all these tariffs and whatnot. Global trade is in a shambles. And so we've got a lot of work to do. But it starts with all of us waking up, which I'll get back to, the idea that when you start picking on Don Lemon and you start shooting people in the streets and you start kidnapping 5-year-old boys, that's when people like we're talking about, Dan, who still have a basic moral personal compass and still have, the basic morals and the basic ethics that all of us, generally were brought up with. That's when the wheels start coming off of your little regime, when you really go overboard like that. So we hope that everybody stays safe over the course of this weekend. A lot of people getting out and demonstrating and speaking up and using their First Amendment rights. We applaud all of that. As we say every time when we come up on one of these weekends, when some of these events are happening, please be safe. Don't let anybody encourage you into breaking the law. Don't do anything to escalate because, especially here in Texas, especially these days, they're looking for any opportunity to get rough. And so let's not give them those opportunities. Dan Barrios is a member of the Richardson City Council. Man, it's been great to meet you, and good luck with your campaign, and stay safe out there and keep in touch with us.
Thank you for the opportunity, and I enjoyed the talk. Thank you to everybody.
Absolutely. Progress Texas is a statewide nonprofit rapid response media organization promoting progressive messages and actions. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media and action in the Lone Star State. In Progress also airs on KPFT Radio in Houston, 90.1 FM HD2 every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. More information on the radio station at kpft.org. More information about our work is at progresstexas.org.